Harriet the Hippo was a very happy hippo, with a heart as big as her round, wiggly belly and a smile that could light up the whole riverbank. She was known far and wide for her cheerful spirit and the way she always found something to be joyful about, no matter the day. Harriet lived in a sparkling river under the warm sun, where the water glimmered like diamonds and the air was always filled with the songs of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. The river was her playground, her home, and her favorite place in the whole wide world. She loved to splash, float, and blow big bubbly bubbles that shimmered in the sunlight. Sometimes she'd chase her own bubbles downstream, giggling as they popped on her nose, or invite her friends to join in the fun, turning the river into a festival of laughter and play. But most of all, Harriet loved her tiny, bright blue hat with a yellow pom-pom perched right on top of her enormous head. The hat was so small, it looked almost like a blueberry with a golden sunbeam. But to Harriet, it was the most wonderful thing she owned. Every morning, she'd stretch her stubby legs, take a deep breath of fresh river air, and carefully place her hat on her head. Then she'd grin at her reflection in the water, admiring how the little hat made her look extra special and ready for the day. The hat made her feel special, fancy, and perfectly Harriet. It was her favorite thing in the world, a little piece of happiness she could wear wherever she went. With her hat on, she felt like she could do anything. "Hello, world!" she'd bellow, her hat wobbling with every move, the yellow pom-pom bouncing up and down as if it were waving hello, too. Her voice echoed across the river, making the frogs jump and the birds flutter in the trees. The hat went everywhere with her, floating just above her ears when she swam, shading a tiny spot on her head when she basked in the sun, and even joining her on her adventures through the tall grass and wildflowers along the riverbank. Sometimes the other animals would whisper and chuckle, "Look at that tiny hat!" They'd giggle behind their paws or wings, thinking it looked funny on such a big hippo. But Harriet didn't mind one bit. Instead, Harriet just wiggled her ears, making her hat dance and the pom-pom jiggle. She'd even do a little twirl, showing off her hat with pride, because she knew it was what made her unique. She knew her hat was tiny, and that was the best part. It was her own special style, a little secret of happiness that only she truly understood. To Harriet, her hat was a dot of delight, her tiny treasure. She treated it with care, always making sure it was clean and bright, and sometimes she'd even sing it a little song as she put it on. Her happiness was as big as she was, and her hat was the little pom-pom on top, a cheerful reminder that joy can come in the smallest packages. No matter what others thought, Harriet's hat made her feel wonderful. It gave her confidence, made her stand tall, and filled her with a warm, fuzzy feeling from her nose to her toes. With her tiny hat on, Harriet was ready for whatever the day might bring, whether it was a new adventure, a splashy swim, or a quiet nap in the sun. The river sparkled, her hat bounced, and Harriet's heart was full of hope and happiness, ready to share her joy with everyone she met. For Harriet, happiness was a tiny hat and a big smile, and she wore both with pride every single day. And that was all that mattered, because sometimes the littlest things can bring the biggest joy. One sunny morning, Harriet took a wobbly walk along the riverbank, her tiny hat bouncing with every step. The hat was a bright, cheerful yellow, and it had a little red feather sticking out of the side. Harriet loved how it made her feel special and unique. She met Wallace the walrus, who was polishing his tusks, and looked up with surprise. Wallace was a large, dignified walrus with a monocle and a bow tie. He always took great pride in his appearance. "Harriet, what is that tiny thing on your head? A hippo as grand as you needs a grand hat," he boomed. His voice echoed along the riverbank, startling a few birds into flight. Wallace was serious and liked things to be proper. He believed that every creature should look their best at all times, and he often gave advice on fashion and etiquette. Harriet just giggled, her hat jiggling with her laughter. She found Wallace's seriousness amusing and couldn't help but laugh at his stern expression. "Too small? Not at all," she declared, spinning in the mud. The mud splashed around her, but she didn't mind. She loved the feeling of the cool mud on her skin and the way it made her hat wobble even more. "This hat is for fun, not for shade," Harriet explained, her eyes twinkling with mischief. She loved how the hat made her feel lighthearted and carefree. Wallace shook his head, not understanding. He couldn't fathom why anyone would wear a hat that didn't serve a practical purpose. "If you say so, Harriet, but it still looks awfully tiny to me," Wallace said, scratching his head with one of his flippers. He was genuinely puzzled by Harriet's choice. Harriet shrugged and continued on her way, smiling. She didn't need Wallace to understand. She was happy with her hat, and that was all that mattered. She knew her hat was perfect, even if Wallace didn't get it. It was a symbol of her individuality and her joy. Her hat wasn't for making sense, it was for making her smile, and that was enough. As she walked away, the sun shone brightly, and her hat bobbed cheerfully with each step, a testament to her happy spirit. Harriet strolled past tall acacia trees, humming happily. Gerald the giraffe called down from above. "Harriet, is that you? I almost didn't see your hat. It's so tiny." He suggested she wear a hat as big as a lily pad or a banana leaf. Harriet laughed. "Too small? Not at all. This hat is my little piece of sunshine." She did a happy hop, making the pom-pom bounce. Gerald watched, still thinking it was a very small hat for a very big hippo, but he saw how much it made Harriet smile. "Well, it certainly is a happy-looking hat," he said, grinning. Harriet waved goodbye, feeling as sunny as her hat's pom-pom. She continued her journey, joyfully unique. Warm from her walk, Harriet slid into the cool river, her tiny hat bobbing beside her. Penelope the pelican paddled over, eyeing the hat. "That can't be a hat! It's no bigger than a snail's shell!" Penelope believed everything should be useful. Harriet just beamed. "Too small? Not at all. This hat is my little drop of delight." She blew bubbles, making Penelope smile despite herself. "If it makes you happy, then it's a good hat for you," Penelope said, flying off. Harriet floated on, her hat bobbing faithfully by her side. She felt perfectly wonderful. Excitement buzzed along the riverbank. It was finally time for the Great River Race, the most anticipated event of the year. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and animals from all over the forest had gathered to cheer for their favorite teams. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of splashing water as the boats lined up at the starting point. Harriet's team was in the lead, their boat gliding smoothly across the sparkling river. But just as they rounded the final bend, disaster struck. Henry the Hippo, their strongest paddler, slipped on a wet patch and tumbled onto the deck, clutching his foot in pain. The team panicked. The final leg of the race needed someone to carry the sparkly pink baton all the way to the finish line. Without Henry, they weren't sure what to do. The baton lay on the deck, glittering in the sunlight, as the team exchanged worried glances. Meanwhile, the crocodiles were catching up fast, their powerful tails propelling them through the water with incredible speed. The gap between the teams was shrinking with every second. The hippos tried to hold the baton, but their big, clumsy feet made it nearly impossible. And the rules were clear. No mouths allowed, only paws or hooves. Harriet glanced down and noticed her tiny, silly hat sitting on the grass nearby, almost forgotten in the chaos. It was small, a little bit ridiculous, and yet, as she stared at it, a spark of inspiration flickered in her mind. Suddenly she had a big idea. Maybe her hat could help them solve the problem. She realized her hat might be the answer they needed. If she could use it to hold the baton, maybe they could finish the race after all. The crowd on the riverbank watched anxiously, their cheers fading into nervous whispers as the race seemed nearly lost for Harriet's team. Harriet's heart pounded in her chest. Could her little hat really save the day? She took a deep breath, determination shining in her eyes. She picked up her hat, hope shining in her eyes, and looked at her teammates. Maybe, just maybe, this small, silly thing could make all the difference. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. In that moment, Harriet believed anything was possible if you dared to try. With her hat in hand and a new plan in mind, Harriet was ready to try. And maybe, just maybe, turn the tide of the Great River Race. Harriet smiled wide, showing her teammates the tiny blue hat. "Don't worry, I have a plan," she announced. She placed the sparkly pink baton on her head, but it wobbled. Then she plopped her tiny hat over the baton. It fit perfectly, holding it in place. The crowd gasped, then cheered. "Hooray for Harriet!" shouted Wallace. Even Penelope was impressed. That tiny hat is useful after all. Harriet felt proud and confident. With the baton secure, she slid into the water. "Go, Harriet, go!" her friends chanted. The crocodiles looked shocked. Harriet swam with all her might, her hat holding the baton steady. The little pom-pom bobbed like a triumphant flag. Harriet was on a mission to win. Harriet swam faster than ever, leaving the crocodiles behind. With a final push, she crossed the finish line. The crowd erupted in cheers. Her teammates lifted her up, celebrating her cleverness and her hat. Wallace, Gerald, and Penelope congratulated her. "That hat is a champion's hat," said Wallace. Harriet beamed, her heart full. That evening, as the sun set, Harriet floated peacefully, her tiny hat back on her head. It was still small and a bit silly, but it was hers. Today, it had helped her prove something important. Being yourself and believing in what makes you different can make you wonderful. As stars twinkled, Harriet wiggled her ears, her pom-pom dancing in the twilight. She loved her hat even more now. The happiest hippo in the river, Harriet knew her best accessory was confidence.